Hey, this podcast discusses sensitive topics. Please be advised. Welcome to the Narcissistic Abuse Rehab Podcast. I'm your host and recovery coach, M. Today we're going to talk about the brand new book by Dr. Christine Cocchiola and Amy Polacko, Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld. In this episode, we're going to talk about a new book that promises to be a game changer for women navigating the complex and often hostile terrain of family court. Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld, released today, is co-authored by two leading voices in the fight against coercive control and the domestic violence that upholds it. Dr. Christine Cocchiola is a seasoned social justice advocate, trauma-informed therapist, and educator. She brings decades of experience to the table. Through her protective parenting program and expert testimony in legislative hearings, she's been at the forefront of pushing for legal recognition of coercive control as the context in which domestic violence occurs. Her deep understanding of its devastating impact on both adults and children comes not only from her clinical work, but also from her personal experience as a protective parent. We're also delighted to welcome back Amy Polacko, an award-winning investigative journalist and divorce coach who's channeled her own painful experience of escaping a narcissistic relationship into a mission of empowering women. Amy has spent years writing about domestic abuse, coercive control, and the dangers women face in family court, where many find themselves trapped in an unfair system. Through her coaching and her widely recognized digital course, Divorce Decoded, Amy has helped hundreds of women reclaim their voices and navigate the perilous path of divorcing abusive partners. Together, in Framed: Women in the Family Court Underworld, Dr. Cocchiola and Amy Polacko expose the hidden injustices of family court, provide essential advice for women facing those challenges, and offer hope for a future where the system better protects those it was meant to serve. Today, we'll discuss their groundbreaking book, the urgency of reform, and the tools they're offering women to fight back against coercive control and reclaim their lives. Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse Rehab, Amy and Christine. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your new book, Framed, which I think is going to be a game changer for victim survivors. Can you please tell me what inspired you to write Framed?
Amy and I have been colleagues for a long time, or for quite a few years, I should say. And we just sometimes will be sharing stories that we have, never identities, right? And just really felt like this all had to get into a book. We wanted to be able to share with the world that this is an epidemic, that it's not an anomaly, and we've always been passionate about this. We're both survivors and protective mothers, but really felt like something has to change. Something has to change.
Yeah, that's what jumped out to me, that it addressed what the UN called the shadow pandemic. Amy, in our last interview, we talked a bit about that. Can you tell me where you drew the inspiration from? Because when I read your part of the foreword to the book, you talked about a personal experience that you've written about in Ms. Magazine with Kassenoff.
Absolutely. I think we all have a different healing journey when you've survived abuse like this. And for me, it has been getting back to journalism and shining a light on these issues as a freelance journalist for Ms. and HuffPost and other outlets. So that case you're talking about, Manya, Kassenoff, got international attention. And I think many of us hoped it would be a huge turning point in this movement. You know, the Cliff Notes version is that she lost custody of her daughters. And, you know, she was hopeful that she would get unsupervised visitation back. But ultimately, after a 3 years plus battle that cost both sides millions of dollars in legal fees, she was told she could not see her children, and it was too much for her to bear. And she made the decision to opt for an assisted suicide in Switzerland.
And this story didn't leave you and has evolved into a book that is going to transform survivors' understanding of their experiences. I wanted to ask you, who do you think this book will help most?
Well, I think, right. Go ahead, Amy. Do you want to go ahead?
I was going to say that we really have several audiences, I think, right? Dr. C, I mean, one of them is validating these women who are going through this and saying to them, you're not alone. You know, you're not crazy. There are women just like you. So that's part of it. The other is warning and educating women who are dating, married. Maybe they realize something's wrong. Maybe they don't. So I think all of these stories are cautionary tales. And then last but not least, we hope that the masses, the allies who care about women's rights, whether you're a woman or a man, will get so angry at these stories that they will be moved to act and join us. I know, Dr. C, you want to talk about the call to action we have for people?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we wanted to make sure that people didn't just read the stories, but that they actually read the stories, as Amy says, and then kind of get angry. Like, what? This is really going on in the world every single day. There's victims and survivors trying to get through this family court system. And to understand, it is a dark underworld where women and children in particular are harmed so much at such a greater rate. And, for the men listening to your podcast, by the way, right now, this isn't about an us versus them issue. We cannot, as a society, begin to take care of our most vulnerable unless we actually pivot to our most vulnerable. Our most vulnerable in the world are, frankly, women of color. The rate of death, number one death for ages 15 to 35 is domestic violence for women who are Black. If that doesn't outrage you as a human being, if that doesn't outrage you, or this other stat that I think is just astounding, 35% of women suffer violence in their lifetime. That's the violent. What of the non-violent abuses that many, many women and men are experiencing? And then how many children are there that are experiencing this in their family system? So if this book doesn't outrage you, I mean, I know Amy and I feel very passionately, I'm sure you do too, but if it doesn't outrage you, I don't know what could. I don't know what could outrage you. And so how do we, what can we do? We can engage in legislation. We can begin, funds to support women trying to leave from a moneyed parent. The other parent is moneyed, and they're literally using scorched earth, we call it, like they're scorching the earth of this protective parent. Anything to destroy her, including the weaponization of children, which I'm sure is my particular niche. It's really distressing, and nobody wants to acknowledge it. But frankly, like, how much longer can we continue to pretend it's not actually occurring?
Dr. C, thank you. Thank you for highlighting those aspects of this type of abuse. I want to ask you, as a clinician, were you shocked when you discovered the gap between what we know in the psychology field and what's happening in the family court?
I would say so. I'm not sure your listeners are aware, but I've actually been doing this work since I was 19. I've been a domestic abuse, sexual assault crisis counselor since the age of 19. I volunteered at a local domestic violence agency, met my partner when I was 16, and didn't know he was an abuser. So I, as a child welfare social worker, a school social worker, a college professor teaching on this every single semester, what we've done incorrectly is we've looked through the violent incident model.
Yeah.
Every time we think of abuse, we think it has to be a bruise. We think someone has to get pushed. And the reality is that abusers don't start off with that. Very rarely do they start off with that. Mm-hmm. They start off with what, as Amy always refers to, what we ask our readers to tell us. What was the beginning of your relationship? Because the beginning of the relationship was probably pretty damn good.
Was everything you ever wanted.
Yes, exactly. And so abusers know how. I call it perfect prey. I have a podcast called Perfect Prey, because abusers know how to find people's vulnerabilities. For me, the number one indicator that you're in an abusive relationship is that someone has used your vulnerabilities against you in some way. And so it's not the violent incident model.
No.
It's about power and control.
And that's taught to you by your mentor, the late Dr. Evan Stark, who we lost this year.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes.
it delights me to see you carrying the torch for
We are trying.
discoveries.
Yeah.
I wanted to move on to the next question because the foreword of the book was written by Dr. Ramani, and she unpacks the divorce industrial complex as a prelude to the both of you empowering survivors to share their experiences. Can you describe the women who shared their stories in Framed?
Well, first of all, we are so grateful to Dr. Ramani for writing the foreword, and also Tina Swithin of One Mom's Battle for writing the epilogue. But the women are from around the world, a diverse group of women, 22 of them from the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, and all walks of life. I would say different age groups, different demographic backgrounds. So we think, as Dr. C said, the reader will identify with these stories. The dating, the courtship, the flowers, the, trips, all the fun in the beginning. We say in here, it's a roller coaster ride. And we're taught in our society that that's the way it should be. We are watching Disney movies and rom-coms and things about the Prince Charming. And so I think that every woman will be able to identify with these women's stories, even though there are many common threads. And as we say in the bottom of the book, know the abuser's playbook. There is a playbook that we see surface in every story. There are different details. I mean, some women still have their children. Some have lost custody tragically of their children. I don't want to give it all away, but they are different. Each one has a different twist to it, I would say.
And Dr. C, what would you say about the women that you included in Framed?
I would say that these women, like every single victim and survivor, are the most resilient people you will ever meet in your life. The things that have happened to these women that Amy and I hear every single day in our work, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of women, the things that they've had to endure, there is just a disbelief that they are still standing, that they are still able to parent and to love and to contribute to society in some way, carrying this overwhelming grief and burden that is simply because of a complicit system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a system that re-traumatizes people who are recipients of this type of abuse. As I was reading Framed over the weekend, I kept thinking about how it will resonate with our listeners and survivors around the world. When I say around the world, I'm thinking about the loss of the Olympian Rebecca Cheptegei, who died as a consequence of post-separation abuse, which is an extension of the coercive control you talk about in the book, which is why this book is so important and timely. I felt curious about why you guys believe our listeners should read Framed.
Well, we want people to know that tragic case you're talking about, or Catherine Kassenoff, or recently in the US, we had a Colorado mom who was jailed for 2 weekends for trying to protect her kids from reunification therapy with an accused abuser. These cases are not anomalies. They're not just a one-off exception. We have 22 stories in here. We often say we could have 2,200 or 22,000. Mm-hmm. And so what we want readers to know is this is a human rights crisis. This is going to take a social justice movement that's like all others we've seen in our history, grassroots, and it's going to take all of us, those of us who've been affected by this family court system and those who have not, and just care about women and children.
Yeah. Yeah. And to dovetail, I think it's really important to highlight too, is that people assume that abuse has to be like horrifyingly bad. Like when people think of coercive control, what I often hear people say is, well, he didn't lock me in a room, or he didn't, take my car keys, and so people in general, victims and survivors, tend to minimize their experiences, right? And what we need people to understand is that coercive control is a pattern of behavior, and it can be very covert. It doesn't have to be blatantly what we all would say is abuse. Again, beyond the physical violent incident model, right? And so some of the stories in the book are, like they seem like they're abusive, but, if you're a person who's in that doubt space, you might be like, well, it's not that bad. I mean, it was bad, but it's not that bad. And then, as the stories progress, they tend to get a little bit worse. Would you say, Amy, right? We save, sadly, the worst for last. But I think what is really important for your listeners to understand is that if you don't have voice or agency in your life, if you're made to acquiesce to someone, if you are not able to be your true, authentic self in a relationship, that is coercion and control. Mm-hmm. That is someone exerting power and control over you. So if he didn't lock you in a room or he didn't call you this week, and he hasn't done that for 3 weeks or a month, it doesn't mean that it's not abuse. Mm-hmm. And this is really important because I think my experience has been, even with many experts in the field, is that I kind of am that being a little bit loud about the fact that so much of this is abuse, because it is. Mm-hmm. Because it is abuse. And if we continue to minimize experiences that are abuse and we don't quantify them as abuse, then victims and survivors will never leave. They will never escape. No. Because they will wonder all the time. This is what abusers do, is they strip us of our autonomy, our ability to know what we should know. So all I need is one person. And by the way, that was me. I went back 5 times. All I needed was one good experience or one memory or one person to say, is it really that bad? And I was teaching on it. Mm-hmm. We need to shift. We need to shift the conversation and say, no, abuse is abuse. One time more than once is abuse.
In addition to the insights that the mothers share and framed, what other insights does the book offer?
Well, I think after each story, we have notes, which kind of give you our take on the story and learnings. And I think it deals with relationships. It deals with what's happening in our family court system. There are a lot of great studies that Dr. C included there. And I think it's validating for people. You talked a few minutes ago about the betrayal of the system. I mean, there is this cognitive dissonance when you realize you're with an abuser and this type of relationship we're talking about. But then you go to the system that's supposed to help you, and there's that cognitive dissonance. Like, no, it can't be this bad. I remember that's how I felt. I thought, this can't be happening. Like the first few things that happened, I explained it away. I thought, okay, you're overreacting. And then I saw more and more and more evidence of that. The entire system is broken and discriminatory against women, especially domestic abuse survivors. I was asked, why do you have to call yourself a victim? And it took me a while to get the strength to say, because I am, so I think we've got to validate that for women all along the way. I know that's something we do in our work. It's one of the most heartbreaking things we have to do is tell women that this is the system you're up against, because I think so many think, well, I'll just tell my story. They're going to see that I'm the victim. Of course, this is so black and white, right? But family court is an upside down world. White is black and black is white. Abusers get custody of children. So we don't want to scare anyone, but we feel that it's our jobs to protect women, not just our clients, but everyone who reads this book, so they are empowered and they know what they're going into.
Yeah. And I think to Amy's point is that this is about also engaging fathers. Like, you have a daughter, I don't care if she's 5, 10, 15, 20 years old, you should be reading this book. Because you don't know what abusers are capable of. Nobody again chooses to be in an abusive relationship. So if you're a father, an uncle, a brother, and you have a younger person in your life who might be dating soon, this is a conversation that needs to be had. It's kind of it's hard to talk about abuse, right? And, it's hard to escape these abusive situations. And we want any of your listeners who are still in that relationship to understand there's no judgment for staying, because guess what? These stories make it really scary to think about leaving, to escaping.
Something that struck me when I read the book, in every story, I noticed that each mother found her face slammed up against the glass of patriarchy. Dr. Evan Stark described coercive, controlling, or entrapment-based relationships as mini regimes of patriarchy, so that when you try to exit that ecosystem, it's enforced in institutions like the family court. It's enforced or reinforced rather by law enforcement who ask, did he hit you? And if he didn't hit you, you receive no protection at all. So I love that about the book. I love the language that you use in it. And I think it's going to help survivors develop a language to tell their own stories like the mothers in the book. I wanted to ask you if you would be willing to read your favorite excerpts from Framed and share them with our listeners.
This story is called Blue Wall of Silence. It's Joya. She's here in the United States. And I just thought that I would read just her little ending because, so this is a mom who was married to a police officer. And the system, what I'd like to do is, since this has been written, there's been changes. So I thought I could read a little blurb of it, and then I can tell you the things that have occurred since this has been published. Since 2018, Arthur has been under more than one internal investigation with his employer, the state police, for the ongoing use of his position as a police officer to intimidate me. There has been no accountability, and sadly, the state police only investigate policy violations. So even if there had been accountability, the consequences are minimal. The case was sent to the Office of the Attorney General. However, our state does not allow protection orders for non-physical abuse and domestic violence. Restraining and harassment orders have been an option, but my lawyers advise that, similar to the protection order obstacle, the lack of physical evidence would most likely have the request dismissed. After Arthur lied to his employer about having a court order to keep my children outside of our parenting plan, I was given the option to complete a harassment order form, but warned that I could not be kept safe from reprisal. I opted to forego the harassment order form simply because there was too much at stake. Beyond my safety, I also am cognizant that the lack of accountability only empowers him, not to mention that if he loses his job, I will be left to financially support him. And so since this time, what's happened with Joya is her children came home with bruises. The second child witnessed the first child being assaulted by the father, came home with bruises, and she went to the Department of Children and Families and made a report and went to the pediatrician, and the children had disclosed to their school counselors at school. And the Department of Children and Families came out and investigated, and the children disclosed in front of mother, and then they went to their father's house for their regular visitation. And the Department of Children and Families went there, and they recanted. And they said that mother made them lie. Mom lost custody for 3 weeks. Court order put in place that she could not see or talk to her children for 3 weeks. And she had to drop the charges. And DCF actually testified against her, saying she had manipulated the situation. There's no recognition that a child might recant out of fear. Like how could there not be recognition, right? So I'm not sure. It's good news, but now she's back to 50-50 with her abuser. She's sharing parenting time.
That's something that I hear a lot on both sides of the pond, that as soon as a mother mentions abuse or children mention abuse, that it's part of the praxis or the protocol to assume that the mother is manipulating the children.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's Joan Meier's study that we talk about in the book. You know, she's the George Washington University law professor here in the U.S., and her study shows that women are believed less than half the time when they report abuse, and only 15% of the time when they're reporting child sexual abuse. So the numbers don't lie.
No.
I can read another story if you'd like. I wouldn't say we have favorites because we love all of them. They each have a different twist. This one is Lucy's, a snippet of Lucy's. It's called Spiritual Abuse. And in this case, I would say she's one of our younger moms, and her very dashing husband used the church, which was extremely misogynistic, to control her, and got the church elders to side with him. She had no contact with one of her sons for almost 3 years, but this is just the end of her story. However, time keeps passing and my abuser continues to delay, manipulate, and weaponize the kids to maintain separation from me. I've spent $600,000 in legal fees thanks to my parents generously offering me their entire retirement to fight for my kids. But so much time has passed that I wonder if there will be any kids at the end of this. They are quickly approaching manhood, and there is no end in sight for the divorce. I tell my story with the hope that it can demonstrate the devastation that occurs in families when the institutions that were set up to protect the vulnerable are broken. My situation exemplifies the need for change within the family court system and serves as a cautionary tale. Women are equipped with strong intuition that can either be nurtured or silenced. In the fog of youth, promise, and romance, it's easy to ignore our internal warning systems and get swept away. But I swear upon my soul that our bodies know. Even if we convince ourselves that fear and butterflies can't coexist, they can. And you can long for a life with someone dangerous. Nurture your voice and find a way to get strong so they can't dismantle the gifts you have brought into the world. Making ourselves small to accommodate someone's rage does not end well. I had to lose everything to learn that, but that doesn't have to be your story.
That is powerful. These are excellent excerpts. I'm so happy that you shared them with our listeners today. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes to your website so that they can. Do you have the book on pre-order? That's what I wanted to ask you.
Yes, but it is available for order on October 1st, which is the first day of National Domestic Violence Awareness Month here in the U.S. So people can order it right now and go to narcfreepress.com.
Awesome. And I also wanted to take a moment just again to highlight your podcast, Dr. C, Perfect Prey.
Thank you so
link to
much.
that as well.
Yes. I'm grateful. I'm having some expert guests come on, and then every other podcast, either sharing some of my own thoughts, but also sometimes having adult victims of children who grew up in a coercively controlling environment are now speaking out and coming on the podcast to talk about their experiences. So if any of your listeners have had this experience, I have a doc on my website where they can actually fill out if they'd like to be a guest.
That's amazing. So we're going to link to all of these resources in the show notes. Amy and Christine, thank you so much for being here today and sharing the astute and amazing book you've written.
Thank you, Manya. Thanks for all the work you do.
The book is framed Women in the Family Court Underworld, and it's available right now. Click the link in the show notes to grab your copy today. This is a must-read for anyone facing the challenges of family court, especially those dealing with coercive control. Once again, thanks to Dr. Christine Cocchiola and Amy Polacko for sharing their invaluable expertise and their tireless work advocating for women. Guys, get your copy today. A little bit of housekeeping. If you're looking for personalized help navigating your own recovery, we're here for you. Use the link in the show notes to log onto our booking page for a free coaching consultation. Also, in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we're offering our new clients 30% off our coaching packages throughout the month of November. Just use the discount code DVAM24 when you book your free consultation. Guys, now it's your turn. Please share your thoughts and feelings about how the family court system is used as a venue for post-separation abuse in coercive control. Has this happened to you or someone you know? I want to hear from you in the comments. Thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, be good to yourself, and we'll talk again soon.